So let's talk a little bit about the killed virus that is mandatory in every state, rabies virus.
Rabies.
And let's talk about why some states there have a 1-year option and a 3-year option.
Right.
Some of my clients erroneously think that the 3-year vaccine is 3 times stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think it's 3 times as much volume. Some
Right.
people think that it's been researched 3 times longer. If you could shed a little bit of light on what's really going on, that would be excellent.
Okay, now rabies is a really good example of a non-infectious vaccine. Now, prior to the mid-'80s, all of our canine and feline rabies vaccines were modified live. So 1 dose was adequate to immunize, and you generally gave that dose at 12 weeks of age or older when there was no maternally derived antibody to interfere. In those days, with the modified live, you then would revaccinate each year because they didn't know whether or not the immunity was longer than that. Well, in the late 70s and early 80s, we had an episode occur in this country where some kittens being vaccinated in California came down with rabies. And that caused USDA to rethink the approval of a modified live rabies vaccine. Now, this may have actually been not the vaccine becoming virulent, but those kittens could very well have been severely immune suppressed. They could have actually been infected with feline leukemia virus and or feline immune deficiency virus. And that's why they came down with rabies. But obviously, when that happened, it was decided that modified live or infectious rabies would no longer be allowed, and we then started switching entirely over to a non-infectious killed inactivated rabies product. We never did change the vaccination program. We changed the vaccine, but not the program. And my recommendations, actually back in 1976, which I published then, and in 77 and 78, when we switched from a modified live rabies vaccine to an inactivated vaccine, we should give 2 doses 2 to 4 weeks apart and then revaccinate in a year. But we didn't. Fortunately, the rabies glycoprotein antigen in the killed vaccine is a very powerful antigen, and they had to add something to that vaccine, which you generally have to add to most inactivated vaccines, called an adjuvant. And an adjuvant is a very strong immunostimulant which provided enough stimulation to that glycoprotein to allow that 1 dose of vaccine to stimulate in a majority, not in all, but in a majority of dogs and kittens, a protective response until another dose could be given a year later. Now, generally, when you go much beyond about 6 to 8 weeks between the 2 doses, you'll have no immunity at all. For example, any of you who might use a lepto product, you would never go beyond 6 weeks between the 2 doses because you wouldn't have any immunity at all. That's a very weak antigen compared to rabies.
So back to antigens.
Mm-hmm.
What is added? Could you go over the antigenics, the antigens that are added to veterinary vaccines? Some of the antigens that have been included in human vaccines, like the thimerosal, have been, they have removed them from the vaccines, but that hasn't been the case in veterinary medicine.
Okay, so there's a number of different things added to various vaccines. One is a preservative, and the thimerosal, which contains mercury, is a very effective preservative. and that has been added to human vaccines for many, many years. It's one of the most effective preservatives.